A cold CEO found a girl feeding her baby under the rain, unaware she'd lost everything but hope. The rain fell like shards of ice against the pavement, each drop echoing through the empty parking garage beneath the Sterling Tower. Marcus Blackwood stood by his Mercedes, briefcase in hand when he heard it, a sound so soft it almost dissolved into the storm. A baby's cry, not the demanding wail of discomfort, but something weaker, more desperate. He turned, his designer shoes clicking against the wet concrete, and that's when he saw her. A young woman huddled in the corner between two concrete pillars, her body curved protectively over an infant wrapped in what looked like layers of torn fabric. Her clothes clung to her like a second skin, soaked through, and her hair hung in dark, wet ribbons across her face. But it was her hands that stopped him cold. They were trembling violently as she tried to nurse her baby, whispering words he couldn't hear, her lips moving in what might have been a prayer or a lullaby. In that moment, something cracked in Marcus Blackwood's carefully constructed world, something he'd spent 15 years building walls around. He'd seen poverty in statistics, in quarterly reports about corporate social responsibility, in tax-deductible donations to faceless charities. But he'd never seen it like this, raw, immediate, and impossibly human. If this story touches your heart, please take a moment to like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to Kindness Pulse for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Your support helps us spread these powerful messages of hope and compassion. Marcus took a step forward, then hesitated. In boardrooms, he commanded respect with a single glance. He'd negotiated billion-dollar deals without flinching, had fired hundreds without losing sleep, had built an empire on the principle that emotion was weakness and sentiment was a luxury he couldn't afford. His ex-wife had called him a machine. His daughter, in their last conversation 3 years ago, had called him something worse, a stranger. But standing there watching this woman try to shield her child from a world that had clearly abandoned them both, he felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. Fear. Not of her, but of himself, of what it meant that he'd almost walked past, almost driven away, almost returned to his penthouse where the rain was just an aesthetic backdrop against floor-to-ceiling windows. "Excuse me," he said, his voice rougher than intended. The woman's head snapped up and he saw her eyes, large, dark, filled with a terror that made him take an instinctive step back. She clutched her baby tighter, and he realized with a sickening clarity that she was afraid of him. Of course she was. Here he stood in a $3,000 suit, tall and imposing, a man who represented everything that had probably failed her. "I'm not going to hurt you," he added quickly, raising his hands. You need help." She stared at him for a long moment, her whole body rigid with suspicion. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "We're fine. Please just go. I'll move. I'm sorry for being here. I didn't know this was private property. We'll leave right now." She tried to stand, but her legs buckled and Marcus lunged forward instinctively, catching her elbow before she fell. The baby, he could see now it was a little girl, maybe 4 or 5 months old, let out a weak cry. Up close, he could see the purple shadows under the woman's eyes, the gaunt hollows of her cheeks, the way her lips were cracked and bleeding. This wasn't just a bad day. This was someone at the absolute end of their rope, hanging on by threads so thin they were nearly invisible. "When did you last eat?" Marcus asked, and the question came out more like a demand. She flinched but didn't answer. "Come with me," he said, making a decision that went against every instinct that had made him successful. "My office is upstairs. It's warm, dry. You can rest, eat something. Both of you." She shook her head frantically. "I can't. I don't need charity. I just need—" She trailed off, and he saw her face crumble for just a second before she forced it back into that mask of desperate composure. "I just need the rain to stop so I can figure out what to do next." Marcus did something then that surprised even himself. He took off his coat, his Brioni coat that cost more than most people's monthly rent, and wrapped it around her shoulders. "I'm not offering charity," he lied. "I'm offering basic human decency. There's a difference." The words felt foreign in his mouth, words he might have mocked in a business meeting as naive sentiment. But here, in this cold garage with rain hammering above them, they felt like the truest thing he'd said in years. Her name was Sophie Chen, and her story came out in fragments over the next hours. She'd been a teacher before her husband died in a construction accident, 6 months into her pregnancy. The insurance company had found a technicality to deny the claim. Her family had disowned her years ago for marrying against their wishes. She'd burned through her savings on medical bills from a complicated delivery, lost her apartment when she couldn't make rent, lived in her car until it was repossessed, applied to 50 jobs, 100 jobs, but who wants to hire a woman with a newborn and no childcare? She'd sold everything. Her wedding ring, her phone, her laptop, every possession that had once defined her life. All she had left was Emma, her daughter, and a determination so fierce it had kept them alive through 3 weeks of homelessness. I kept telling myself, Sophie said, her voice breaking as she sat in Marcus's office wrapped in a blanket, Emma sleeping peacefully in her arms after being fed and changed, that tomorrow would be better. Every single day I told myself that. Even when I didn't believe it, I said it out loud because Emma needed to hear hope in my voice. Marcus stood at his window, looking out at the city he'd conquered, but never really seen. How many Sophies were out there right now, invisible in the shadows of his skyscrapers? How many times had he walked past suffering and told himself it wasn't his problem, that his success somehow exempted him from responsibility to the struggling? He thought about his daughter, Madison, 22 now and refusing to speak to him. He'd missed her childhood chasing the next merger, the next acquisition, the next zero in his net worth. He'd told himself he was building a legacy, but what he'd actually built was a prison of his own making, isolated, cold, and ultimately meaningless. You haven't lost everything, Marcus said quietly, turning to face Sophie. You still have her, and you still have hope. That makes you richer than I've been in a very long time. Over the following weeks, Marcus did something that baffled his board of directors and delighted the media. He didn't just write Sophie a check, though he did that too, enough to secure her an apartment and cushion while she got back on her feet. He created a foundation, the Emma Initiative, dedicated to helping single parents facing homelessness. He partnered with local businesses to create job training programs with built-in childcare. He used his network and his influence not to accumulate more wealth, but to redistribute opportunity. And he called his daughter Madison, who was shocked to hear vulnerability in his voice for the first time she could remember. Their conversation was awkward, painful, full of 15 years of hurt that couldn't be erased in one call. But it was a beginning. Sophie, for her part, didn't just disappear into a better life. She joined the foundation as its director of outreach, using her own experience to connect with others who'd fallen through society's cracks. She became the heart of an organization that Marcus's money had built, but couldn't animate with purpose. Together, the CEO who'd forgotten his humanity and the mother who'd never lost hers, they created something that changed hundreds of lives. Before we close this story, I want to ask you to take action. If these stories matter to you, if they remind you that compassion can change the world, please hit that like button, drop a comment telling us about a time someone showed you unexpected kindness, and subscribe to Kindness Pulse. Let's build a community that celebrates the helpers, the hope givers, and the everyday heroes among us. 5 years later, Marcus Blackwood would stand in that same parking garage, now transformed into a resource center for the Emma Initiative, and remember that rainy night. He'd remember the sound of a baby's cry cutting through his carefully constructed indifference, the sight of a woman choosing hope when she had every reason to surrender to despair. Sophie would be there too, Emma now in kindergarten, thriving and loved, and Marcus would finally understand the lesson that Sophie had tried to teach him from that very first moment. Wealth isn't measured in what you have, but in what you give. Success isn't about how high you climb, but about who you lift up along the way. And hope, real, transformative hope, isn't found in boardrooms or bank accounts. It's found in the quiet courage of people who refuse to give up, even when the world has given up on them. Sometimes all it takes is one person who chooses to see, to stop, to care. One moment when compassion becomes action. That's how the world changes. Not through grand gestures or perfect plans, but through the simple decision to treat another person's suffering as if it matters. Because it does. Because they do. Because we all do. And in the end, that's the only thing that ever really mattered at all.